All right, now you've played the video. And so I really like how the individual talks about, how first impressions fool us all the time. We meet someone and we think all these different things because we, do stories about each other. We're meaning-making people as well. And so I really enjoy what the educator said at the end through the interview process. When they do meet someone, they think about, they recognize the stories they're telling themselves about that other party, and they think based on what. So that is a strategy that we can use, especially in the search process as well. We also, when we think of bias interrupters, we want to have an awareness of what our biases are and be aware of our blind spots as well. A motivation to change. Think about a stereotype you hold and consciously replace it with accurate information. Periodically evaluate your judgment and the judgment of others, and consider whether evaluation biases are influencing your decisions. Speak up as well. So I always like to talk about implicit bias and structural racialization. So we know that structural biases and racism are part of science ecosystem as well. And I like this statement. This is from Dr. Quinn Capers from Ohio State University, who talks about how we become increasingly mindful of how race and cognition factors, such as implicit bias, can operate in conjunction with structural racialization. Together, these two powerful forces create barriers that impede access to opportunity across many critical life domains, such as housing, education, health, and criminal justice as well. And this is a great diagram. This I took from Racial Equity Tools, which is a fantastic website. And I really like this diagram because they talk about a holistic frame that shows this continual interaction between the internal, so our personal, our biases, privilege, internalized racism, and the external, so the interpersonal, institutional, and structural as well. And so this is a self-perpetuating system. And we have to interrupt it both at the individual or internal level and external level in order for lasting change to occur. So the importance of this continuous self-work is to understand and heal our own internalized privilege or oppression, and it's integral to analyze and dismantle systemic inequity as well. So this frame can support personal insight and renewal as well as build capacity to analyze inequity in education and healthcare as well. All right, now just turning to biased indicators of excellence. So when we think about the definition of the most qualified, I always like to take that step back and think, where did we get these definitions from? Who decides this too, as well? And so standards that are previously seen as objective and reliable include years of experience, number of publications and citations, and size of research grants. And all three of these metrics are subject to unconscious bias. All right, so in terms of the facts, I'm just going to put these all up. So underrepresented groups are more likely to face systemic barriers, such as career interruptions and academic interruptions. Also, members of underrepresented groups may be asked to contribute disproportionately to service activities as well, which impacts teaching and research productivity. And research has shown that women and Indigenous people are less likely to describe individual accomplishments as well. We also have to consider through the search process groupthink bias. So think, when you're evaluating decisions, make sure to ask and be receptive to the feedback of others. We know that, for example, a diverse committee will avoid affinity bias, so hiring people just like you. But groupthink bias is the behavior of a group of people who, in order to ensure the group's harmony and integrity, they refrain from thinking or acting controversially to the group. They don't want to engage in conflict because they probably want that need for closure to make that decision as well. And so, you want to ensure that all voices are heard and encourage a discussion format that requires contributions from all members. And so make sure that everyone has that opportunity and everyone does speak as well. And think with your group through the search process, do you feel comfortable questioning one another's about a decision as well? Okay, so think of diversity in the search committee. So you want to ensure there's diverse representation in the search committee, and discuss diversity as a key element of excellence in terms of job expectations, evaluation criteria, drafting the ads, evaluating applications, and interviewing candidates. In terms of best practices in recruitment, you want to ensure the ad encourages a diverse pool of applicants. So think about how this speaks to applicants. So you might want to say like people who may have scholarship, experience, and expertise as well in emerging or interdisciplinary wording as well too. You want to use an inclusive, unbiased, ungendered language, and so you can use this gender decoder, which we have the link to for job ad wording. It's free. You can just put your job ad in it and it will tell you if it's masculine or feminine coded. Consider asking the candidate for a diversity statement and discuss with the search committee how that should be evaluated and weighted. And advertise widely, including internationally, and to professional and discipline industry-specific associations as well, and have an active recruitment plan. So in terms of evaluating applications, you want to ensure that they are done fairly. So discuss in advance how the criteria should be weighed before any review is done. Use those measures and have that criteria in front of you as you're reviewing each candidate's application as well, because if you don't do that the same, other criteria may be applied to the advantage of one or some applicants over others. When looking at deciding on top candidates, don't allow bias to interfere with decision-making processes. So be consistent in interpreting the previously agreed upon criteria with the search committee. So to help with this, distribute or display the criteria again, and avoid fit as a mean to indulge personal bias, and stay away from discussions that are unrelated to the evaluation criteria too. Further, you don't want to undervalue research that's non-traditional and unconventional. The best candidates may not have the most years or experience, highest numbers of publications, or largest academic accomplishments. But think about that diversity, that filling out the team as well, that diversity in experience. You want to ground discussions of personality and examples from the interview or application package and relate back to the evaluation criteria. And accommodations cannot be used as negative assessments as well. So I always like to remind people that in Manitoba, we have the Manitoba Human Rights Code that covers 13 protected characteristics, which I've listed on the slides. So if there are any questions asked related to any of these 13 protected characteristics, they're discriminatory. So please stay away from that. I still hear about that from time to time as well. So don't ask any questions related to these characteristics. So let's just take a step back for a moment. Really, why is this all so important too? Because it is. When we think of Manitoba in particular, we know that the health disparity gap is widening between non-Indigenous and Indigenous people. We know that Black, Indigenous people of color continue to experience poorer health care and outcomes, receiving worse care for up to 40% of quality measures. Healthcare providers' perceptions of patients vary depending on the patient's race, ethnicity, and patients who experience discrimination in medical interactions can result in fear of accessing care. I've heard stories where they've had a discriminatory experience or experienced racism, and then they haven't gone back because of that as well. All right, so what are strategies we can look at to reduce, neutralize implicit biases as well? And so the first 4 of these are taken from Dr. Quinn Capers, and he talks about common identity formation. So focus on a shared common identity between you and the candidate. Also, perspective taking. Take the perspective of a member of a group against which you have an unconscious bias. Also consider the opposite, and I love this, this example too. So he discusses how when the data seems to point to one conclusion, really briefly look to the data supporting the opposite conclusion before making that final decision as well. And then looking at counter-stereotypical exemplars as well. So spend time with or focus on individuals you admire from groups against which you have that bias as well. And then finally, I say take the Manitoba Indigenous Cultural Safety Training or other cultural trainings too. And then this is, again, from the Ed Goose article, so strategies to combat our implicit biases. And there's lots of great information in here and resources. So you'll see in particular, one of the videos I took is from here, and they also discuss the implicit association test. And what I like to focus on in some of these strategies is that learning to slow down. That's similar to what the snacks and punishment video talked about. You know, if you can slow down and not be so rushed, then maybe our biases won't be activated as well. But that's not always possible too. So think of what can you do for yourself to take that mental step back. Is it deep breaths? They also discuss mindfulness. So think of strategies that will work for you too. All right, and we have to move beyond one-time diversity training. Real change requires shifting to a culture that allows open dialogue and continuous learning at all levels. And no one can be exempt as well. So I really like this article on the impact of how unconscious bias in healthcare, how to recognize and mitigate it as well. So the authors in here discuss how organizational level, personal level strategies are needed to mitigate unconscious bias. And you'll see the orange circles indicate the organization-specific strategies. The green circles are the individual-specific strategies, and the blue are what is needed from both as well, that to operate, to look at our implicit bias too. So organizations, they further discuss, need to commit to a cultural shift by building institutional capacity for change. This involves reaffirming the need to not only on the recruitment of a critical mass of underrepresented individuals, but equally important, the recruitment of a critical actor to move this about as well within our organizations too. All right, so in summary, take the implicit association test. Have the selection committee take the implicit association test. Provide additional readings. We have an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion LibGuide in the Neil John McLean Library as a resource for you as well. It's also linked on our website too. Discuss how bias can play a role with your selection committee. Have cheat sheets with you on the actual interview day, and I can provide that. So just contact me for more information to that regard, and engage in dialogues too. When I think of, we've reviewed why I have biases, what I can do to address my biases, and finish off with what you have that responsibility to do. So think of what you can do for yourself to address that. And in terms of future focus, look at your program's websites for signs of diversity and inclusion. Include a statement of diversity as part of your program's mission and a commitment to diversity too. And invite more diverse applicants to interview, being mindful of the bias in standardized testing as well. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact me directly. You can reach me via email at jackie.gruber@umanitoba.ca or on the phone 204-789-3240 as well. And there's a wealth of additional resources that you can explore. So for our website, in particular for the office, I also want to mention our disruption of all forms of racism policy for Rady Faculty of Health Sciences. We have our equity, diversity, inclusion policy, and the resources on EDI and inclusion in health. And there's a lot more different resources available for you to explore. So I would encourage you to look through these different links that is provided as well. I do want to thank you so much for your time, and please, I encourage you to reach out to me should you have any questions.